Okay, I have an anatomy quiz today in a couple, about 30 minutes. So I'm just going to be studying a bit for that. I'll be showing you guys a bit of what I've been studying lately. I've been studying more on the nervous system, specifically the central nervous system. So I'll be showing you guys some of the figures I study. I have to try and understand and some of the readings. So it's more on the central nervous system side of the brain and cranial nerves. So I have to try and memorize all these cranial nerves right here. Here's some of them. For a lab quiz, that's going to be this week also. So I'm going to be talking about this first figure, about this brain, the developing brain. Let's start. And I'm going to be also going over my notes that I took in class to help supplement what I need to know and what I don't need to know. Okay, so after our last exam, we talked about the brain. So there was a picture pulled up of Dr. Taylor, who had a stroke on the left side of her brain, and how she was able to survive it and teach herself how to study brains, and how different sides of the brain have different functions. So the brain. The brain is what separates humans from the animal world, particularly the cerebrum. And from the cerebrum, particularly the cerebral cortex. It's a convoluted cap that separates us from other animals, forms our big heads, and causes, sometimes the cerebrum can cause birth problems. 5 or 6 functional regions of the brain give us a gigantic head relative to our bodies. How is there room for this? The brain has about 100 billion neurons. Most of the neurons in the brain have microscopically small processes and very small axons. It has microscopically small neurons and neuroglia and trillions of neuroglia. In the brain, the functional unit of a neuron has a lot of diversity to it. The brain has lots of the brain has very few neurons that are exact images of other neurons. Neurons come in many different shapes and sizes. Some of them have a cell body with hundreds of dendrites and axons. An action potential moves at a slower rate, slower travel per distance, but lots of information is traveling. An example would be the cross-extensor reflex, which has about 10 times or 100 times that complexity. Slower travel per distance. The brain is the center for integration of information. Integration circuits take information from a stimulus through an afferent pathway to the resting spinal cord. In the brain. Central nervous system, there might be a synapse and that goes to an interneuron, and then another synapse to an efferent neuron to an effector. An interneuron is the simplest form of an integration center, matching up stimulus with a single simple response. In the brain, a stimulus is matched with multiple responses that are connected with other stimuli. If you have photons in your eye hitting your retina, it will go through a cranial nerve to a certain part of your brain where it will not only be connected to an outgoing effect, but also a memory. A sight or image can be connected to a reflexive response. The simplest level of organization, so stimulus, response, associating what is happening at the current moment to what might have happened at a previous or another moment. Simplest associating responses, integrating gives humans the most basic level of consciousness, awareness, and awakeness. Integration gives us behavior, stimulus, response, and effect. Gives us emotional, color, memory, intelligence, learning of color, learning with emotions. In order to learn, you must pair a current experience to a past experience, relating something to a past experience. 5 levels of brain integration, simplest, antagonizing, rave. I'm falling asleep. I legit fell asleep. Yeah, when you're studying, guys, don't forget to get enough sleep the day before your exams and quizzes. Wasn't able to sleep that good last night when I woke up, so plan ahead. You'll never know if you're gonna be waking up in the middle of the night and lose sleep. I took a cold shower this morning. Hopefully it keeps me going throughout the day. Okay, back to that figure of the brain. So the brain allows us lots of different functions. The brain does some handing around of information so that you can get a working function. Consciousness, this in order of complexity. If you don't have a brain, you won't be aware of things, and if you're not aware of much, your body may react and respond to touch, but you don't have a brain that coordinates a response. If you have a nervous system and not a brainy, consciousness equals awareness. Basic behaviors, the stimulus and response behaviors with some amount of storage to it, so you can learn, allowing you to respond in a different way to different kinds of behaviors. Emotion involves more parts of the brain affecting what you are learning or how you respond. Memory and emotions share certain brain parts in producing their functions. Intelligence is higher intelligence is being able to recall and relate information from different sources, to see patterns in information and sense exceptions to patterns. We talked about this table, picture of the developing brain. Okay. Labeling, assigning a name to the categories, so most sophisticated form of intelligence capacity, taking what you have learned and making a prediction. Forming some sort of conscious of right or wrong. Study specific names of tracks and columns, bundles of nerves or neurons in white matter. There's a notch, the neural groove becomes the nervous system. Study specific neurons. Study specific names of tracks and columns, specific bones in the gray matter called. Tracks and columns are in the white matter. Specific bundles in the gray matter called nuclei. Don't need to know things like anterior geniculate nucleus. Don't need to know a specific nucleus in the brain. The encephalon consists of the thalamus and hypothalamus. Epithalamus is the chemical gland. prosencephalon, mesencephalon, rhombencephalon. Frontal, middle, and hind brain. Mesencephalon is the midbrain. Telencephalon grows into cerebral cap. In only 6 weeks of gestation, a notch develops on the top of the ball called the neural groove. The neural groove remains on the top and becomes the nervous system. The yellow bulb becomes a cap that covers everything down to the myencephalon. Underneath the cap, there is a branch, a stem, that shows that shows where it sits. Myencephalon, the spinal cord becomes the medulla oblongata by expanding a bit, by accepting a few cranial nerves coming into the medulla. The medulla oblongata is known for visceral control of autonomic centers for regulation of visceral. Respiratory function in relation to respiratory centers in medulla that keep you alive, digestive function, cardiac function, vascular function, heartbeat, contraction force, blood vessel ability to constrict. Location is in 3 places, basic control centers. The pons and the cerebellum. The pons sends info to the cerebellum. Pons sends info to the cerebellum as a relay center. The pons is the biggest relay center for the cerebellum, the relay center that gets involved with conscious and somatic visceral motor control. Cerebellum is about the coordination in your skeletal responses, needs input from cerebral cortex, motor area, combined with impulse from your sensory apparatus. It gets information from motor area of cerebral cortex, cerebrum versus cerebellum. Core fat positioning. Cerebrum tells you how far to move your arms. Cerebellum requires input through the pons. The midbrain has an odd bunch of functions not moving in the same direction. The midbrain has a bunch of odd functions not moving in the same direction, breaks into areas of its own, processes synapses, connecting incoming information with the correct outgoing response from optic and auditory nerves, and sending that information to other parts of the brain. Maintaining consciousness, reflexes may not be going into higher regions of the brain. Somatic motor response is mediated by midbrain. The diencephalon has the hypothalamus, controls your most basic emotions. Things you are born with: rage, fear, contentment. Autonomic functions with antidiuretic hormone. Production from epinephrine of hemochlorine production. The thalamus is the relay for more relay than processing, filtering incoming relay centers, even as a cat name, cerebrum. Cerebellum does conscious thought process and intellectual functions, such as an example would be if you were bumping into the door or someone pinching your arm so you can punch them back. Cerebrum mainly does coordinating of incoming information with outgoing skeletal responses. the brainstem. The cerebrum mainly does the coordination of incoming information, outgoing skeletal response. Stimulus response can be basic or can involve lots of emotions and memory. So the cerebrum is for memory, the hypothalamus is for emotion. Brainstem is something we don't share with the rest of the animal kingdom. It's for we have higher thought processes. Olfactory nerve is the most well-known nerve. Cerebrospinal fluid is sent up the central canal into a ventricle and circulates into the lateral ventricle. How does cerebrospinal fluid circulate without a pump? The central canal is cerebrospinal fluid that lies in the ventricle, mixed up an opening into the back of your brain, which houses the cerebrospinal fluid, brain version of spinal cord and central canal. That goes into the passageway called the quadrant. Connection with circulatory system. Oh yes. As long as your blood is pumping plasma flowing through special membranes. At a special membrane of the body, the plasma is selected by ependymal cells. Ependymal cells line capillary on the way to ventricles. Ependymal cells have tiny cilia on apical surface. Only small things fit through. It's like a magic sieve. Cells such as pia matter become specialized plasma, deciding what ions go into the cerebrospinal fluid. Ependymal cells are the magic sieve. Interior cerebrospinal fluid has ways of dumping waste into the bloodstream. Cerebrospinal fluid flows through ventricles, goes down spinal cord to central canal, and back out the spinal cord to complete circulation. Hydrocephalus is a condition in infants where they get too much cerebrospinal fluid in their brain. The little red arrows show you how the flow goes, entering the bloodstream as its source. The problem with hydrocephalus is because brain does not have enough room to swell sitting inside the cranial bones, and the brain has a high demand for oxygen and a high demand for glucose, unable to store glycogen. Synapse is why there's so much oxygen and glucose. It's because it is sending information across the brain. Proprioception, information about the position of skeletal muscles, tendons, and joints. Decussation. Some impulse that enter the decussate at the cord once and at the medulla, crossing over of information from right to left side of body, vice versa, of the brain. Blood-brain barrier with astrocytes surrounding vesicles. Blood cerebrospinal fluid barrier has ependymal cells taking the place of astrocytes. Controlled access to blood. Brain keeps itself isolated from the bloodstream, not completely isolated, but controlled. What can cause this blood-brain barrier without loss of control? Gases, non-polar molecules, and thus nicotine, lipid-based, and anterior. Capillaries control the access of nervous tissue. it's regulated, so proteins, antibiotics, chemicals, microbial toxins are most likely to be excluded from neural tissue and are controlled in their axis nervous system. Actively transports ions in choroid plexus. Active transport. The brain is not red like the liver because the blood is controlled. It is full of cerebrospinal fluid. On the underside of the brain, there are cranial nerves. Olfactory bulb takes info about odors, smells. Olfactory tract has odor information that's sent to the brain. Divided cerebellum, thalamus, hypothalamus, optic nerve, infundibulum is the bridge that then goes into hypophysis, pituitary gland. Spinal cord is a connection with the brain for input and output. Cranial nerves between the brain. Pathways on the matter come from the brain. Long myelinated axons will synapse on their way out of the cord information from all important places in the brain, decussation in the medulla, external structures in the brain. A big crack on the brain down the middle called the longitudinal fissure. Primary motor cortex down the primary motor pathway. So the third pathway is proprioception. It has information about the position of skeletal muscles, tendons, and joints. Those are the proprioceptors, allow your brain to know your position even if your eyes are closed. All of these have a bridge across the spinal cord. Response from the cord to skeletal muscles. A big crack in the brain is called the longitudinal fissure. The fissure occurs all through a big one. There's a big one that divides the brain into two hemispheres. The lesser fissures, smaller one, tiny indentations called foci, lumps in between folds, are called gyri or gyrus. Information along these pathways to the brain, input is afferent and output is efferent. The order of neurons. Neurons going from the stimulus point to the central nervous system are called first-order neurons. First-order neurons go into the spinal cord, usually as a cell body in its dorsal root ganglion. Second-order neurons take information from the cord to the medulla from first synapse point to the thalamus. Second-order neurons go from first synapse point in the central nervous system up to the thalamus. Thalamus is information deciding what it wants you to be aware of and not be aware of. The cerebral cortex is well mapped as to which part of the cortex is receiving what. Third order neuron, proprioception. Third order neuron takes information from the thalamus to the cerebral cortex. Information comes from the back of or central nervous system. Visual information projected to the occipital lobe. First order neurons on return information tends to bypass returning information comes from central nervous system. First order nervous on the return if the information voluntarily is something you're conscious of doing. Information comes from thalamus, pyramidal pathways. Pyramid is a region in brain's stem shaped like a triangle. Pyramidal pathways are called direct pathways, willing something to happen. There's a lot going on in your body even as you walk and swing your arms, going through extra non-pyramidal tracks, conscious versus subconscious, direct versus indirect movement of skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles move through indirect pathway, makes direct stops in the brain. Less direct is somatic skeletal muscles, subconscious muscles moving up things. You're not thinking about indirect pathway going through extra or non-pyramidal tracks, skeletal muscles moving, but through an indirect pathway. All brainstem has functional layers, respiratory centers, pneumotaxic centers located in the nuclei of the medulla. Nuclei connected by bulbs going to respiratory muscles. Neurons need to go through cardiovascular centers. Pneumotaxic centers. The medulla has regions that go through specific functions. Posterior to lateral view shows for how many nuclei that goes through medulla and is called the reticular. The medulla has regions that go through specific functions. Posterior to lateral view shows how many nuclei there are. Goes through medulla and is called the reticular formation, dangling between the reticulum and the infundibulum. Central sulcus is the biggest foci. Makes a frontal cut across the brain, divides sensory and motor half of brain. Central sulcus, longitudinal fissure. Brain lobes and cortical lobes are based on labels under them. Thanks guys for watching. I'm very struggling right now. Very much struggling to keep myself awake studying for this. I gotta go take my quiz now and just hope for the best. Hopefully I stay awake. This was a tough study video and I was able to go through all the notes, thank goodness.